It's difficult to believe, given the size of the work, that Wagner's last opera is all built on very little material, relatively speaking. The very first phrase that we hear holds in itself the germs of dramatically important leitmotifs recurring throughout the entire work. The first one is the fellowship or redemption motif spanning 2 bars. Overlapping it is the wound or guilt motif starting halfway through the second bar, and the third is the motif of the spear covering the last 3 bars. Hello everyone, I'm Gianmaria Griglio and I welcome you to a new episode of Conducting Pills. If you're new here, this channel is all about classical music appreciation, score analysis and conducting tips. I want to thank all my patrons for making this series possible. Now, on with Wagner. He plays me the prelude from the orchestral sketch. My emotion lasts long. Then he speaks to me about this feature in the mystery of the grave, of blood turning into wine, which permits us to turn our gaze refreshed back to earth, whereas the conversation of wine into blood draws us away from the earth. In this way, Richard Wagner's wife Cosima describes in her diary on September 26, 1877, her first encounter with her husband's last opera. And Richard himself noted that the prelude contains all that's needed and it all unfolds like a flower from its bud. The prelude is an introduction to the opera, not just to its various motifs, but also to the inner nobility that the listener should derive and be invested in by the end of the performance. The structure is essentially built on 3 sections, similar to the traditional Italian overture of the 18th century. The music reveals itself very slowly, giving the audience all the chances to absorb it. Notice the orchestration, warm, elegant, violins and cellos with mutes, 1 bassoon and 1 clarinet. It's interesting to also notice the tonal ambiguity, shifting between A flat major and C minor. Pulsing triplets of the flutes and clarinets, along with the swarming arpeggios of the violas, accompany warm chords of the trombones, horns and bassoons. Everyone is starting in their lowest register, building up a wall of sound. It's a cocoon out of which the main motif emerges in a solo trumpet, doubled by the oboes and half of the violins, first and second. The other half of the violins join the violas in the arpeggio figures, contributing to the build-up of this cathedral of sound. The phrase dies out in A flat major, same key in which it started. There's a clear break, silence, and the entire episode is repeated in C minor this time, with some minor changes in the orchestration. Another pause, and Wagner offers us the Grail motif, played by a trumpet. This motif has a much longer story. It's in fact known as the Dresden Amen. It was written by Johann Gottlieb Naumann for the Royal Chapel in Dresden. Wagner became familiar with this music during his Dresden years, between 1842 and 1849, though it's likely that he heard it as a boy attending church in the same city. But he was not the only one. This motif was used by Mendelssohn in his Reformation Symphony. Bruckner used it in several motets, and Wagner himself had already used it in Das Liebesverbot and Tannhäuser. The Faith motif follows, announced by the first horn and 2 trumpets. The Grail motif returns in the strings, followed by the Fate motif. The initial grandeur makes room for a more meditative take on it. Wagner moves the orchestration to the woodwinds first, and then to the strings. Horns and bassoon answer right away, in forte and then in fortissimo, with the aid of the rest of the orchestra minus the woodwinds. And notice how Wagner is using blocks of orchestration, already very much present in his earlier works, to give a different tone to the same motif every time. The woodwinds meditate on the motif once more, in piano, as we approach the third section of this prelude. A roll of the timpani on a low A flat, the tremolo of the strings, and we hear the very first motif again, played by the English horn, second clarinet, and the first bassoon. The motif is somewhat developed, both rhythmically and thematically, and we can clearly see the motif of the spear taking over. This motif will become very important in the prelude to the third act, where Parsifal bears the sacred spear. This MIDI development is kept quite short. The first violins retake it once more and hand the phrase to the woodwinds, who pick up the rising syncopated figures of the opening bars. The first violins rise up themselves with an E-flat arpeggio, and notice the absence of the rest of the strings, and the prelude fades in an ethereal pianissimo suspended on an E-flat 7 chord. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button right below this video and ring the bell so that you will get notified every time a new video comes out. Now, for more in-depth analysis, conducting technique, conducting exercises, look on my website where you can find more than 80 videos and follow my Facebook group. If you want to support this series, you're always welcome to do so on Patreon. All the links are in the description. Let me know in the comments what you think about this piece, if you have any suggestions for future videos, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Conducting Pills, when we will kick off a new series of videos dedicated to conducting exercise. Fear not, the score analysis will still be part of the channel, and the next video on this subject will be dedicated to Gianmaria from Weber's overture to his opera Euryanthe. In the meantime, please continue to enjoy music and be well. Ciao! It's very easy to get sidetracked by the offbeat accents. First of all, use a pulseless cue to start the first violins. Second, use your wrist and keep your gestures to a minimum.